Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Welcome. This is Create with Franz. How to create the life that you want by using mindset techniques, neuroscience, and why not all the protocols that have been devised by people who have had a particular issue. And today we're going to talk about how many lives we lose every year because we are not aware. There is so much neurodiversity in our families, in our friends, in our community. Sometimes it goes completely under the covers. You can't really tell it that there is something, but it's not really diagnosed. So the person doesn't know what's going on. The other people think there's something there, but we're not really sure. And so we are like high achievers and, high functioning, and we try our best, but eventually there's a time when we have to say, okay, there is something here going on. It's stopping me from living the life that I really want and deserve. What can I do about it? And this is really what happened to Jonathan Kemp, which is our amazing guest today, all the way from Great Britain. And he's going to talk about how he managed all these conditions. He had lots of bipolar, depression, and dyslexia, meaning the beginning of this, plus the cascade of effect that happened because he had to function in a society that expects you to be perfect and up to scratch and everything else. So my first thing is welcome to the show. Hello, and thank you for being here. I know you're very, very busy, Jonathan. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, Franz. Really nice to be here.
It is nice to talk about these difficult problems because they cover all our life. There's some friend somewhere, some relative, and they have this problem. And you also had the problems, but people would have assumed you were very happy, maybe blissfully happy because you were born into privilege. Your family, you can explain what it was like to be there. And inside you have these struggles. So how did they develop? And I leave you just the microphone to talk and explain, and you can do it much better than me.
Thank you very much. Yes, you're right. So by British standards, I was born into a very privileged background. Our family have a title which I inherited when my father passed away. And, on the face of it, I had every opportunity available to me. I was destined to go to private schools. And then the expectation was probably maybe go to university, possibly Oxford or Cambridge, which is where my great-grandfather went, and then to go and work, possibly in the city or join the army or something along those lines. And quite early on, I felt there wasn't something was missing. I didn't feel I really fitted in with my family. I didn't feel I fitted in at school, though if you'd asked me, why or what was the problem, I couldn't have articulated it. Just something wasn't right. And when I went to boarding school, this feeling continued. I struggled with my studies. Some of the masters thought I was lazy or I just wasn't applying myself. But at times, I genuinely tried my best, but I never seemed to do particularly well. And I then, age 13, I left my first school, went on to a second boarding school where I hoped to make a fresh start, new friends, everything will be different this time. But quite quickly, the same sort of challenges came up. I had difficulty with studying again. I had friends, but I felt somehow I didn't fit in, or I found it difficult to be part of a group of people. And once I hit 15, 16, I pretty much sort of not stopped studying, but I stopped really trying to apply myself because I knew there was no point because I never did particularly well anyway. I got very distracted by fishing. I was a very keen fisherman. And where I went to boarding school, we were lucky there was some lakes nearby. And it was also the time of punk rock. So punk rock had just come out. And to me, it was like music from heaven. It just, all the songs, the different groups, um, they described a life that to me, I just completely understood what they were saying, why they were saying it. And so I sort of threw myself into punk rock at the same time. And again, I preferred my own company a lot of the time. There was just something wrong. I had this sort of interference going on in my head, which never seemed to go away completely. And by the time I left school, I got poor exam results, which I'd had to retake my exams, and I still got poor exam results. I didn't go to university, which is what a lot of my fellow students did. And actually, I worked on building sites, which was probably a little bit unusual for someone from my background, but it's what I enjoyed doing. I enjoyed doing physical labor, and I was really, really lucky. Um, a relative of mine offered me a job in Australia, um, and I took it mainly because no, I sort of sensed it was a sort of once in a lifetime opportunity. And I said, yes, please. And so I ended up and I worked they call them jackaroos, but the American equivalent is a cowboy. So I worked as a jackaroo on a cattle station in the Australian outback for a year. And this was the first time I really tried to start turning things around. So I consciously did as well as I could at the work. It was hard work. We were doing about 10 plus hours a day. We worked half days, Saturdays. And I did the very best I could. But again, I just felt really difficult to put my finger on it. It was just something not right. I was drinking quite a bit and doing some other things. And when I came back to the UK after a year, I knew that the sort of dividing line for me between sanity and insanity was finer than a piece of hair. And if I drank or did other things, I crossed over. So actually, at the age of 21, I think it was, I stopped taking drink and I stopped doing other things. And it's been that way for over 40 years. But despite that, I think I went through a period. I trained as a bricklayer after that. Um, I just enjoy physical work and creating something, and still do. And then I had an offer to join the Met Police, so the London Police, and I joined it specifically with the idea of getting my act together. So I assumed that what I was feeling internally was because I wasn't doing things right externally. So if I corrected how I did things externally, so rather than rebel, I conform, do my best, even if my best is only average. And that's what I did. I joined the police and gave it my best shot. But within a couple of years, whatever I did was never enough. So I was always trying to find something externally that would help me feel better. So I got involved in property development, and I was doing this while I was in the police. So I bought a rundown property and renovated it with a view to maybe setting up a property development company. I then found out that you could make more money on the stock market faster. I learned subsequently you can also lose it faster as well. And I invested and I took out bank loans and against the property I had. And for a bit, I was making a lot of money. I'd go in on night duty in the police and I was earning or losing, the equivalent of a year or 2 years worth of salary over a night duty. And I set myself a target. I thought, well, if I can make $1 million by the time I'm 26, I'm useless. I don't really like myself, but I can just about accept that as being an acceptable achievement. However, the moment it looked like I might achieve it, I immediately reset the goal and I thought 10 million, which was insane. And I remember I was walking down the street. I can remember which street it was, and I had this sudden sort of dawn awakening. It didn't matter how much money I made, it wouldn't make a scrap of difference. And I'd pushed myself to the point that I had tingling down my arm, down the side of my face. I had chest pains. And about 4 weeks later, the markets crashed and I'd had enough. So I carried on with the police. I got promoted. I was a sergeant. And I tended to spend more time on my own. And the police is a sort of funny occupation in that depending on what you're doing, you actually do a lot of it on your own. And that suited me. I then left the police to go to university because I thought my problem was, and the reason I was feeling the way I was is because I never went to university. I didn't have a degree. So I actually did a postgraduate diploma in management studies. And then I went on to do a master's degree. And I chose quite a technical subject. It was shipping, trade, and international finance. And they were both really tough courses. I developed a new way of taking notes. I sort of picked up a technique which enabled people, myself included, to sort of map information. And I started using one of these techniques and quite quickly modifying it because I found the way that it was originally explained to me didn't quite work. And I literally worked my socks off for 2 years. In the second year, I took 1 day off every 2 weeks. I worked between 10 to 11 hours a day. And I nearly got distinction. And they said it was one of the most remarkable things they'd ever seen. But at the end of it, I was completely burnt out. And I didn't even think I could get a job flipping a burger. So the idea that, academic achievement was something, again, that sort of another cross off the list. And I tried other things like sort of self-development courses with supposed gurus, religion. Some things were just completely ridiculous. So, and I won't even talk about it. It was so ridiculous. But anyway, suffice to say that none of these made a difference. And by this time, I'd had a partner, but my mental state was getting worse. And although I'd been sort of involved in self-help groups for getting better, I'd never actually seen a doctor. In fact, it never occurred to me to see a doctor. I think I sort of vaguely knew that people saw therapists, and if they were really mad, they went to see a psychiatrist. But for myself, as far as I was concerned, to do either of those two things was a weakness, and yeah, it was shameful. But I got to a point, so I was in my late 30s, and I was on my way out. I tried all the things that I thought of, so I thought what was happening internally was because of something external, the job, the money, the education, the friends. It was something out there. And I tried all these things. So I ticked them all off, and none of them had made, I was about to say, a scrap of difference. And I think in terms of like what was going on in my brain, I think it was pretty accurate. And I reached a point of no return again. I had no other options, and I went to see a therapist. And for me, that was like, I was completely defeated. And if I'd had any options or any energy to do anything else, I would have done it in the blink of an eye. And that really started a journey. The therapist said I was depressed, and I said, no, I'm not depressed. Um, I later found out when I wasn't depressed that actually I really, really was depressed. But because I'd never known anything different, it was just like the normal way of existing. I saw another therapist and they said the same thing. And I said, no, I'm not. But after about a year, I'd been going to sort of individual therapy, group therapy. And I found both of those helpful for sort of day-to-day living, helpful for interpersonal relationships, both at home and at work. But it was sort of existing was still an effort. And I went through another tough period. And really, on the encouragement and inspiration of a friend, I thought, okay, I'm going to try medication for depression. And I did that. I had a few side effects, but which is normal for that type of medication. But after about 4 months, it was weird. It was just like some of the things that had always been bothering me just weren't bothering me anymore. And certainly looking back, I had no doubt whatsoever that I had been severely depressed. It's just because it was, as I said before, it was just a normal state of being. And it's slightly embarrassing, but my often answer to things that went wrong, although I never actually voiced it, I just think, oh, I wish I was dead. That was my answers to everything. And again, that had just become normal. And it was through therapy that I was becoming more honest with what was actually happening. And they would challenge and say, well, do you really mean that? Do you know the consequence of that? Do you know what will happen to other people if you actually take that thought through? And once I'd been challenged, and I could see almost beyond that immediate thought, I stopped using that as an immediate response to everything that went wrong. And I'd used it as a response for years, 20 plus years. And so things were changing. I could feel and sense things were changing, but I was still having these sort of like really down moments. And I remember I was going home one day. I'd had another of these sort of really down moments, and I thought, I just can't do this anymore. I haven't got the will or the energy to sort of keep on doing this. And some friends of mine had actually been to a medical center in the US and had found it really helpful. And so I took out a bank loan and I went there. And on the first day, I was diagnosed with depression. So I knew about that. But they also diagnosed me with bipolar. And I'd never heard bipolar. I had no idea what it was. And they gave me a DVD. God, we haven't used DVDs for years. But anyway, they gave me a DVD on bipolar. So I went off and I stuck it in the telly and watched. And I think I sort of vaguely got it, but didn't really understand. However, the combination of the medicine for the bipolar and the depression made a huge difference. And actually, the therapy became easier and the group therapy became easier. And so I think things shifted and I sort of focused more. I mean, I had two objectives when I left school. One was to feel normal, and the other one was to prove I wasn't stupid. And by the time I left school, I had no doubt in my mind that I was, we call it not the sharpest tack in the box. And in my work, so I worked in shipping for a couple of years, and I then set up my own business, training people to use this note-taking technique that I developed because I found that it worked for it worked for everyone. And it was particularly useful, in a business context. And so over the next sort of like 10 years or so, I was pitching myself and my business to really large global companies and to, their top talents, if I could get through to their top talents. And really what I was doing all the time was trying to prove to myself that I was on the same level as these other people. So a lot of people from my background, I say a lot of people, some people, and it may be a small number, but there are some people from my background who have this sort of almost automatic, I'm rather superior, if they don't say it, they think it's just their performance and the way they carry themselves is different. And I never had any of that. And I got to the point where I had lots of really good feedback on this technique. I'd not been able to fully disassociate the techniques from myself. So somebody criticized the techniques, they criticized myself. And that was another journey to go through, but that's more of a sort of entrepreneur's journey. And I decided to get the techniques scientifically tested. And the first test came through after, took about a year. And they found that there was a huge increase in real-time understanding for anybody who used these techniques. I then did a second test straight away to see if it helps people with dyslexia, because by that point, certainly when I'd started working for myself, a few people who became colleagues, originally they were clients and then they became colleagues, they sort of said, Jonathan, do you think you're dyslexic? And I'd go, why? And they say, well, sometimes when you're speaking, you sort of mix things up. And sometimes when you're writing, you jumble things up. And so when I decided to do the second test, see if it helped people with dyslexia, and on the back of that, I went to get a test, and I was in my late 40s. And it was I went to see a psychologist, and it was a 3-hour test. And at the end of it, she came back and said, yes, you have dyslexia. And my initial reaction was, no, I don't believe you. And we just chatted. She said, well, I'm not going to let you go until you can accept that this is the reality. And at one point during the tests, I remember I was doing this test and I couldn't do it. And it was some form of maths. And then within a millisecond, I was back at school again, about age, I don't know, in my early teens, trying to do a maths exam, not being able to do a maths exam. And I just started crying. And I'm in my late 40s. Anyway, by the time I left that meeting, I'd pretty much accepted, yes, I have dyslexia. And that actually helped to explain a lot. So it helped to explain things like, when I was studying, it would take me roughly time and a half to double time to achieve what other people were doing. So somebody took 4 hours to learn something, it would take me 6 or 8 hours. It helped to explain why I had such difficulty sort of writing reports. If you asked me to do a factual report like I was doing in the police, what happened when you arrested this person, I could visualize what happened and I could record that. If you asked me to, please, can you do a proposal on A, B, and C to achieve E, F, G, my brain would just pop. I just think I can't do it, which was exactly the same reaction I had when I was at school in my 16, 17, trying to do English essays. So it actually made a lot of sense. And things like short-term memory, my memory is appalling, and that's quite common for people with dyslexia. Things like listening and concentration is a real issue for me. And again, that's quite common. So actually having that diagnosis was really helpful. And that made a big difference. And it was funny, after about a year, 2 years, so I'd be early 50s, I just remember one day, and there was no big sort of events. I just thought, I don't have to prove myself anymore. And it was like a miracle. I thought, I'm no better, no worse than anybody else. You know, I have good days, bad days, like everyone else does. But in terms of like intellectual ability, I just don't have to prove myself anymore. And for me, that was just, yeah, it was just amazing. Um, Fast forward to COVID, I thought COVID would be super easy. I thought, I know what shit feels like. It can't be any worse than that. Um, how wrong I was. It was a nightmare because what I hadn't understood was the importance of community and the importance of other people for mental well-being. And once the lockdowns happened, suddenly I was in my flat. I shared the flat with one other person, but otherwise we would sort of tend to work on our own in our separate rooms. I really, really struggled. And then the other thing that happened was I started to get a much better understanding just pre-COVID about bipolar. So I'd had a diagnosis for 15 plus years at this point. And then during COVID, it was like I couldn't escape it. I had about 3 or 4 what they call bipolar highs. And then the only thing that happens after a high is a crash. I then had 4 of those. And by the end of it, I was finished. I thought I just can't do this anymore. And despite everything that I'd learned, it's still the automatic reaction for me was not to go and see a doctor. Just didn't occur. And I'd been thinking about writing a book about mental health, and I decided I wasn't going to certainly publicize anything until I had a good stretch of mental stability. But what I had written at that point was like an emergency action plan. So what happens when I crash? Because when I crash, it feels literally like my brain's been removed from my head. And I looked around and I got it. And number one, I thought, oh my goodness, I'd written to be open-minded and willing, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but when I'm in a sort of really difficult state, the last thing I am is open-minded or willing. Number two was to go and see a professional medical practitioner. And again, my sort of historic behavior would be if I was having a rough patch, maybe about 2, 3 months after it had all finished, I'd be seeing the doctor about something or other, and I'd say, oh, yeah. No, I had a bit of a rough patch 6 months ago. So I wasn't used to sort of seeing them when it was actually happening real time. And number three was to do whatever I was advised to do. So with that in mind, I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. I saw my doctor. They referred me to a psychiatrist, and I had an appointment really fast within about 3 or 4 days. They recommended I change my medication immediately, which I'd avoided doing for 10 plus years, even though I knew it didn't really work or wasn't very effective anymore. I had a bit of a rocky road with the new medication, and that's not too abnormal because what affects me might not affect anybody else, and something that's brilliant for someone else, I try it and it has a completely different reaction. But once the medication was sorted, so this was about August, I think, 2022, it was like a miracle. Literally, it wasn't an effort to think. It wasn't an effort to breathe. It wasn't an effort to walk around. It wasn't an effort. I could just exist, and it was comfortable just existing. It really felt like a miracle. You know, I could walk down the street. I could feel the wind on my face and appreciate the wind on my face. I could feel it on my arms. And it was just, my mind was at peace. And so I had finally, in my early 60s, didn't take too long, achieved what I'd always been looking for, which is that peace of mind. I then took a holiday for about 6 weeks in Vietnam, and on the last sort of 2 weeks, I started writing my book about my experience. And one of the things that drove me, and I think a lot of it was because of my background, my great-grandfather had achieved many things, my grandfather the same. And I sort of always held them up as, this is what I should be doing. They were born in an entirely different period of time, of British history, of British industrial expertise. And so the opportunities were completely different. And it was unfair of me to compare myself with them. And also, I'm a different person as well. But even though I could logically think it, inside my heart, I was driven by this idea of accumulating wealth and of being successful. And once I started writing the book, I thought to myself, well, I can actually define my own definition of wealth. Why does it have to be money? And that's when I decided, well, actually, the real wealth that I have is this huge experience in terms of mental health, both trying to do it my way and then following medical advice, sometimes more than others. And the other wealth of experience I have is my experience with neurodiversity, not doing well and then doing really well. And I thought that is really, really substantial. And so what then fed on from there was I thought, right, if I can get that wealth of knowledge in one place, then success for me, which was another thing that had always driven me, would be just to do my best to put that knowledge in the public sphere to benefit others. And I thought, perfect. And yeah, just arriving at those 2 points, again, has given me a lot of focus. So I'm really focused as to what I need to do. I'm getting less distracted. I'm much less distracted than I have been historically. And it just feels right. Yeah.
So this is quite a poignant story that a lot of people will resonate with, because there's a pressure to be what your family expects you to be, whether it's a plumber or a PhD in neuroscience. There's always that pressure. I had the pressure to be like my parents, work in a big company. And in the end of the day, I didn't really want to be an accountant and for the rest of my life. But there was always that pressure. You're not as good as us because we are not doing that. And you add to this problem that you took so many years to have it diagnosed. And then finally, with a proper medication, and then later with protocols of all sorts, you managed to live a much better life. So a person that has come all the way to here and has already had so much advice, what else have we not said, or can we summarize that they can go home and take home and say, yes, I can do the next step because Jonathan has done it?
Okay. So one of the things that I realized was that there were certain things that I could do which would potentially give me a better quality of life on a day-to-day basis. And that was regardless of my financial status or work status or anything. And I identified about 14 things, and they were really, really simple. Because my sort of excuse in my head was that, well, unless the time's right, I'm not going to do these things. So as a practice, and I don't do them all the time, but I'm sort of very mindful of them. So 3 of them that I find helpful, and they're really simple. So one is sleep, is to do my best to have regular sleep times, regular get up times. Aim for me, I need about 8.5 hours sleep. And that makes a difference. Another thing actually that helped me a lot, it's just popped into my mind. I used to give myself a really hard time, and still can, if the day hasn't gone well and I haven't, done all the things that I wanted, or maybe I let overslept. And so the second thing I wanted to share was a saying that I find really helpful and I use frequently. And that is, you can start your day again at any time. And I find that incredibly helpful. So sometimes I'll just think, oh, God, nothing's going right. And it could be late in the afternoon. And so I'll just say to myself, Jonathan, you can start your day again at any time. And I find that really, really powerful. I'm feeling not very comfortable. I will focus on mindfulness. So if I'm walking in the street, I will focus on my feet as they hit the ground. And that's all I'm thinking about. Or I'll focus on my breathing, through my nose, out through my mouth. And I find just these simple techniques for mindfulness, again, really, really powerful in that it helps to bring me back into the moment and helps to calm my mind down. So 3 simple things: the sleep, I can start my day again at any time, and then the mindfulness.
Thank you. And I think they are so underrated. People don't realize how important it is for a human being on this earth. We're not robots. We need to sleep. We need to breathe. Look at your baby in the night. When the baby hasn't slept, he's very much in a bad mood the day after. When the mommy and daddy have not slept because the baby had not slept, they can't focus on anything. They might be in a bad temper. They might become ill more often. They might become confused, half asleep during the day, can't focus on anything. Their cognitive function goes down. And this is not true just for new parents. It's true for all generations and every age. If you lose your sleep, you could be a paramedic, It's not that everyone going to the club, or you could be chronically ill. There are consequences. So for those of us who can choose, I'm going to go to sleep. Let's do that because sleep is so important. As for breath work, I did have a guest months ago, Chris, and he teaches breath work. He's been healed during breath work. And breathing deeply and properly with the nose, not with the mouth, is a great thing. It really allows people to center themselves and to get all the organs to receive all the oxygen they need. And remember, the brain is also an organ. It needs oxygen. It needs to rest. It needs time to clear. So we can say, oh, now I'm young, I'm going to have fun. You're going to pay for that because one of the causes of Alzheimer is that the toxins are not clear from your system. But most people don't realize you can only clear those toxins if you go to bed early and wake up early and you have this circadian cycle from 8 to 8. That's when the body wants to clean. It doesn't want to clear at 12 p.m. It wants to clear in the night. So these are amazing, wise words. And the other thing you were saying was about being mindful and focus on something very simple, such as, for example, breathing. While instead, most of the time, what do? We have a device and we scroll, and this bombardment of continuous information or misinformation and news from everyone, color, shapes, I think it's quite tiring, especially if one has anything going on in their life that makes them stressed, mental illness of any sort. I really laughed before when you said, and if you're really mad, you go to the psychiatrist. It's no longer that the 60s. That's when we grew up, because I'm from the 60s, and we thought, if you're mad. But nowadays, the psychiatrist is so useful because we allow these conditions, the stress cause or something genetic that we have, and a mix of them, to go unchecked until they become a real problem, they could become addiction. So then we need a psychiatrist to go down really deep because he has all the knowledge, because he's also a doctor, isn't he? He cannot do psychiatry just like that. So it's useful to remember these things that we think are so underrated. They actually have a most important quality for us. Basic stuff, if we promote that in our family, with our children, in the school, it helps everyone to be well. So thank you so much, Jonathan, for sharing this. And I know you have 14 principles that you have in your book. And what was the book was called Finding Peace of Mind, and is out in October. Was it the 10th of October?
Yes, it'll be released on 10th of October, which is World Mental Health Day.
Perfect day, exactly. So I just want to invite you all, if you enjoyed this episode, to share it widely, because mental illness happens to everyone and anyone. Suicide happens, anxiety happens, OCD happens. These are not things to hide. These are things to talk about, so they become, I'm not saying normalized, but they become part of our discussion. So we understand we're not supposed to be all mentally ill. We're supposed to address the symptom and say, well, what's going on here? We have to see a doctor, a therapist. What would have happened, Jonathan, if you had gone to a school and the teacher now will be trained, but they say, oh, you're dyslexic. We're going to give you different type of paper, different fonts. We're going to give you more time for the exam. You would have never thought, well, I'm not really smart. And I got lots of dyslexic friends. We're all smart, just the brain is wired to work in a different way. And that's fine. We just have to know, the diagnostic of a car. What's going on here? What's not working? So it's a discussion that we need to have. And it's important just to learn what is it we can do. Some conditions will always be there, but we can manage them. We can do so much within the framework, and we know when to stop, right? You know when you're like, that's enough for me today, you stop. And I love that you said that you can restart the day. It's 3:00. It's the first time it's 3:00 this day, and it will never be 3:00 this day. So that's the beginning of my new life today. Isn't that a great outlook of life? So thank you so much for being here. And you guys will be pleased to know that Jonathan is coming back to talk more and deeply about dyslexia, what it is, how it works, how it affects you, and what he has done. He actually has a whole course, and the book is part of this. If you want to explain more, do, so that you can see how exactly you can tackle it. Did you want to add anything before we go about this dyslexia thing?
No, I think it's probably best to sort of cover it when we talk again.
Right.
But yes, so I can very quickly say that when the book comes out, there's a couple of pages on the technique that I've developed, which is called SmartWisdom. And there's also a access code in the book, which will give you free access to the online training that I've developed.
It's incredible. It's a very generous gift. And I love that you found, the other side of a coin of having an issue and you sharing with the world how to tackle the issue. And you're giving it to everyone because you know what a blessing it is to live in a different way to feel better. So thank you again for being with us. And please, everyone listening to this, share it with all your friends, whether they have dyslexia, depression, maybe they are bipolar, maybe all three, who knows. And then hopefully this will help somebody today. So click share and subscribe for more of this coming out. And this episode will be airing twice. So now and in October. So you will be reminded how important it is to take care of your mental illnesses as soon as you can, so you don't spend all your life wasting it because you don't know what you have. Just go to the doctor, go to the therapist, get them sorted, and you will feel better. Thank you so much. I'll see you all very soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Franz. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.